The 2025 Atlantic hurricane season begins June 1st. In this week's episode, we're going to discuss NOAA's forecast for the hurricane season from the National Hurricane Center, followed by the forecast from Colorado State University. Then we'll compare both NOAA's and CSU's forecast for 2024 to what actually took place last year. And finally, I'll do a read through of the 2025 Atlantic Basin names. You know what names to keep an ear out for this hurricane season. But first, here's that 16-second intro. Yes, it's hard to believe May is coming to a close and June is right around the corner. Hurricane season starts next month, or in this case, next week from the date that this episode is releasing, meaning it is time to start discussing the outlook for the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. It is been a very active spring, and it is expected to be an above average summer and / fall for the hurricane season. So without further ado, we're going to jump right on into this here. Starting with NOAA's forecasts, both NOAA and Colorado State are forecasting for above average years in the Atlantic Basin. Now, NOAA's forecasting arm for hurricanes is the National Hurricane Center, which is stationed down in Miami, Florida. They have about a 60% chance of an above active year. So they're fairly confident that, we're going to see more storms than what we would typically see in a given year. They're forecasting between 13 and 19 named storms. So that would be a tropical storm or higher. A tropical storm is defined as 39-mile-an-hour winds within a tropical warm-chord system. So it includes tropical storms, hurricanes, major hurricanes. They're expecting 13 to 19 of which will reach that 39-mile-an-hour minimum to become named storms. Of that 13 to 19 range, they are forecasting 6 to 10 of those will become hurricanes, fulfilling the 74-mile-an-hour wind speed requirement. And then of that 6 to 10 hurricanes, they are forecasting 3 to 5 of those to be major hurricanes. That's a category 3 or higher hurricane of the storms. So some of the contributing factors here that the NHC is mentioning within their forecast discussion are really three things. ENSO, which is El Nino, La Nina, the El Nino Southern Oscillation to be specific, sea surface temperatures, and then the Western African monsoon. So firstly, what's going to have the most direct impact on the likelihood, let me rephrase that. All three of these are going to have an impact on the likelihood of a storm forming. However, in terms of seasonality, I would argue that ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, is going to have a much bigger impact on this. So ENSO is currently in a neutral phase, meaning it's not El Nino, it's not La Nina. It's kind of in between, trying to figure out what it wants to be next. Last year was an El Nino year. So the logical assumption would be, all right, it's neutral and it'll eventually swing back to the La Nina. But this has a pretty substantial impact on the hurricane season. Typically, we're in La Nina, and La Nina is more favorable for more hurricanes to develop in the Atlantic Basin and fewer hurricanes to develop in the Pacific Basin. That's due to the vertical wind shear kind of coming over and really the lack of such. So there's nothing taking away the top of storms. I think a better way to describe this is to look at what happens under the El Nino circumstance, which is rare. You don't get El Nino every year. It's every few years. Last year was an El Nino year, so it was an exception. But typically what you see at the El Nino years is the Pacific Basin is a little more active, and then the Atlantic Basin is a little more is a lot quieter compared to what you would typically expect to see. And with El Nino, there's increased vertical wind shear coming across the Caribbean and the Atlantic Basin. And so that wind shear is going in the direct opposition of the direction that the hurricanes want to move. Hurricanes want to go to the west, that wind shear is blowing to the east. Because that's going to shear away the top of a lot of storms, which is not going to allow them to develop and fully mature to the level that they would otherwise be able to. Furthermore, it might steer them northward quicker for the ones that do develop. So El Nino is going to tend to suppress hurricane activity in the Atlantic Basin. La Nina is the opposite effect of that. So the Pacific quiets down, and then the Atlantic kind of ramps up because there's less vertical wind shear over the Atlantic Ocean. So we're in a neutral stage. We're coming out of El Nino. We're in a neutral stage expected to go into La Nina. That's going to be more favorable for hurricane development. Secondly, they list warmer than average sea surface temperatures. We've had this for years now. Every year seems to be above average sea surface temperatures. They're not as warm. At this point in the year, they're not as warm as they were last year, but they're still warmer than normal. So there's plenty of fuel available for a developing system to soak up to become a tropical storm. So there's not much concern there, as that fuel is already there. And then thirdly, with the Western African monsoon, and that's where a lot of hurricanes tend to start in that region right off of Western Africa, as a little low pressure disturbance coming off from their monsoon season off the continent, taking the trade winds out west, and it sits and it grows over that warm water because there's so much moisture, and it takes in that warm water and it grows, and its pressure deepens, and then it starts to rotate, and then it starts to become its own unique system, uninfluenced by any other air mass or pressure system. And then its winds reach 39 miles an hour. It's a tropical storm. It receives a name. It's a more active monsoon, or they're forecasting more active monsoon in Africa. Therefore, you can expect more of those disturbances to make their way offshore into the Atlantic, coupled with the warmer sea surface temperatures, and then the neutral going back to La Nina with the El Nino-La Nina oscillation. You have a very set of favorable conditions for the 2025 hurricane season in the eyes of NOAA and the National Hurricane Center. Now, Colorado State University is surprisingly a very good hurricane. They do a lot of hurricane stuff at Colorado State, which doesn't make a lot of sense because they're landlocked, but they do a lot of hurricane stuff, and they're really good at what they do with it. So every year they put out their own forecast as well. They're researchers and professors with their expectation for the Atlantic Basin. And they're very much on par with what NOAA is forecasting as well. Now, what's different is NOAA likes to give ranges. Colorado State likes to give specific numbers. And all three of their numbers fall within the ranges that NOAA is giving. So their forecasts are in agreement. Colorado State also forecasting an above average year. It's forecasting 17 named storms, 9 of which to become hurricanes, 4 of which to be major hurricanes. So that's consistent with the three ranges that NOAA gave: 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, 2 to 5 major hurricanes. Colorado State's forecasting 17 named, 9 hurricanes, 4 of which become major hurricanes, category 3 or higher. And their contributing factors are very much in line with NOAA's as well. The ENSO being neutral right now, and the strong potential to go back to La Nina later this summer, coupled with warmer than average sea surface temperatures. So they're very much in agreement with NOAA on this. Yep, everything's in place for a disturbance that forms to pick up a lot of steam and to grow, and not a whole lot of resistance as it makes its way across the Atlantic. So we can expect therefore we can expect to see quite a few storms this hurricane season. Now, a forecast is one thing, but if you don't know the accuracy of the forecast, it's not really all that valuable, at least until you have something to compare it against, right? So I decided, why not take a few moments here and discuss both NOAA's and Colorado State's forecast from 2024, what both of their forecasts were compared to what actually happened last year. Because last year, despite it being an El Nino year, it was still a very active year, and largely due to sea surface temperatures were just so much more warmer than what they typically are, that there was so much fuel was able to overcome that increased shear in a lot of cases with the development of all those hurricanes that we saw, including some very record-breaking and historical hurricanes such as Hurricane Helene as an example. But last year, in the Atlantic Basin, and this whole discussion is on the Atlantic hurricane season, there were 18 named storms in total. So tropical storms are higher. Of those 18, 11 of them became hurricanes. Of those 11 hurricanes, 5 ended up making landfall in the U.S. But then of those 11 hurricanes, 5 of which were major hurricanes, category 3 or higher. And of those 5 major hurricanes, 2 of them made landfall in the U.S. It was a very active year. It was a very devastating year last year. But NOAA and CSU they really hit the nail on the head with their forecast last year. They did a really good job. NOAA's forecast, again, NOAA likes to do the ranges. They were forecasting 17 to 25 named storms. There were 18. They were forecasting 8 to 13 hurricanes. There were 11. They were forecasting 4 to 7 of those hurricanes to be major hurricanes. There were 5. Their forecast verified. NOAA was spot on. with their forecast last year. Colorado State now does specific numbers. They forecasted 23 named storms. There were 18. They forecasted 11 hurricanes. There were 11. They forecasted 5 of which to become major hurricanes. There were 5. Colorado State's forecast verified. Both of them did a great job. The federal agency and the university both did a fantastic job with forecasting last year's season. Despite the fact that it was an El Nino year, they still nailed the forecast. That being said, we can have a good amount of confidence because they have a proven track record of having accurate forecasts, and they get better and better every year because they learn. So with that being said, we can expect to have a pretty active Atlantic hurricane season. Now, I would be remiss here after talking about the 2025 season, and this is a hurricane season preview, if I didn't read through the list of names that you could potentially hear depending on when these storms develop and the number of which that do develop. So reading through them in alphabetical order. Now, the quick side tangent, the hurricane names are set by the World Meteorological Organization. And there's a set of standards they have to fulfill. They alternate male-female names. This year it starts with the female, and next year it'll start with the male, and they go back and forth like that. But there's this main set of names, and then there's a secondary set of names. It used to be, if you exhausted the list of names, you would move on to the Greek alphabet. So alpha, beta, I don't know what the next few letters are. But due to a few years ago, might have been 22, 21, a couple years ago, with it being such an active year, and they went through so many of the Greek names with multiple of them going on at the same time, a lot of the Greek letters sound very similar, and people got very confused. So they kind of did away with the Greek letters. Now there's a secondary backup set of names in the event we go through the entire list of 2025 names. Now, hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully we don't get to the backup names, because that means stuff's going terribly wrong. But I'm just going to read through these names real quick. Andrea, Barry, Chantel, Dexter, Aaron, Fernand, Gabrielle, Humberto, Imelda, Jerry, Karen, Lorenzo, Melissa, Nestor, Olga, Pablo, Rebecca, Sebastian, Tanya, Van, and Wendy. And now you can say you have heard the 2025 Atlantic Basin hurricane names. You're welcome. You're welcome. What would you do without me? You wouldn't know You wouldn't know the 2025 names. That's what you would do. So yeah, it's going to be, in all likelihood, it's going to be an above active year. Please stay safe. Take the warning seriously. Listen to local officials. Stay safe this hurricane season. If you're told to evacuate, evacuate. It doesn't look good for you if you're told to evacuate. One last thought I thought I'd mention here. Every year, the National Hurricane Center talks about things are changing with their forecasting ways or with the products they produce each year, and there's always something new, and always some type of advancement. I thought a positive thing I wanted to share going into this year is, the forecast cone that you see on a hurricane forecast, where it's like it shows you where the hurricane is, and then there's like the cone of uncertainty that shows you the range of tracks they believe it can go. Well, it improves every year, it gets smaller every year, and they gave the number for it this year compared to last year's forecast. The Atlantic Basin forecast cone will be between 3 and 5% smaller than what it was in 2024. That means the forecasts are being more accurate. They're more accurate with forecasting the track and the direction of the storm and where it's going to go, where it's going to make landfall. That cone is going to get smaller, and it's going to continue to get smaller year in and year out, which is a very positive thing to see. We're getting pretty good at predicting these things. Yes, that's all I have for this week, this 2025 hurricane season preview. It's always an interesting time of the year with spring kind of winding down, summer picking up, weather's doing the weather stuff. So stay safe out there, and I will always have a good one.